It's one of those nights. You've tried closing your eyes, tried adjusting the pillow, flipping it to the cooler side, tried breathing slower, and still your thoughts won't let go. They loop quietly. Memories, worries, half-finished conversations, or maybe just a kind of weight you can't quite name. An ache in the chest, a restlessness in your limbs. You're tired, but your brain hasn't gotten the memo. Maybe it's anxiety. Maybe it's grief. Maybe it's just being human in a loud world. Whatever it is, it's okay. You're not alone. You don't need to be productive right now, or fixed, or asleep on cue. You just need a place to rest your mind. A quiet corner in history. A story that asks nothing of you. So, let's go back. Not to royalty or battlefields. Not to kings or monks or crumbling castles. Let's walk a quieter path. Let's visit a medieval village and peek inside a small sunlit room where a girl, maybe 12, maybe 14, is learning how to live. Not in the way you might expect. There are no desks, no chalkboards, no pens. But there is education here, just a different kind. You open your eyes. The room is simple stone floor, plaster walls, a wooden bench under a narrow window. Sunlight streams through the glass, wavy and handmade, set in lead. You can smell rushes on the floor, slightly damp. Somewhere nearby, bread is baking. A girl sits at the table, stitching linen with careful, deliberate hands. She doesn't look up. She's focused. Every stitch is part of a pattern passed down by her mother, who learned it from hers. You sit beside her, quietly, unseen, just watching. This is her school. Thread, needle, silence, a lesson not just in sewing, but in patience, in discipline, in preparation. Because in this world, a girl's education wasn't measured in ink or scrolls. It was in movement, chores, rituals, repetition, learning to bake, to pray, to hold her tongue, to keep a house, to read a prayer book if her family owned one, to manage a household even before she had her own. Some girls, the lucky few, might learn to read Latin, might be taught to write their names, might be sent to a convent where books were rare and precious, but not off limits. Most learned different lessons. How to soften her voice, how to serve food in the proper order, how to cover her hair, fold a blanket, carry a child, and above all, how to behave modestly, quietly, carefully, because the world had rules and girls were expected to follow them before they understood them. Still, not all was rigid. There were moments, small, secret, soft, laughter with sisters while shelling peas, singing songs while combing each other's hair, stories whispered in the dark, embroidered into memory like stitches into cloth. If this voice is helping you feel even a little softer inside, you're welcome to like or subscribe, only if it helps. No pressure here, just presence. So, where are you right now? Are you curled beneath a blanket, phone slipping from your hand? Are you lying awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering why sleep feels so far away? You're allowed to be here, just as you are. Let your shoulders drop. Let your eyes drift even if they don't close. Let the pressure to do dissolve, just for a while. Tonight we'll follow this quiet girl through the lessons she never questioned. The rhythms of a life shaped not by exams, but by expectation. Let's begin. Hey guys, tonight we're diving deep into the soft, shadowy corners of medieval life, the ones usually skipped over in the big battles and kings' textbooks. Tonight we're slipping into a quiet cottage just before sunrise. The fire has only just been stoked. The air smells of wood smoke, damp linen, and yesterday's stew. And in the half-light of this room, you'll see a little girl hunched over a lapful of wool, because tonight is all about what girls learned in medieval Europe. You might assume she's learning to read, or maybe reciting something clever in Latin. But no, not yet. First, she's learning the thread. Needles before notebooks. That was the rule. And for good reason, because surviving the Middle Ages often meant knowing how to clothe an entire household. You can't write poetry if you don't have socks. So before girls learned anything else, they learned how to use their hands. You watch her now, small fingers trembling slightly, trying to loop thick thread through a dull needle. She's not very good at it yet. The knot's too tight, the thread keeps splitting, and she pricks herself at least once every 10 minutes. But no one scolds her. Not her mother, not her grandmother, not the older sister, who already stitches with the smug confidence of a seasoned nun. Because the awkward start, is part of the ritual. You bleed a little, you fumble a lot, and eventually you stitch like your life depends on it, because it kind of does. A girl's worth in many households was measured in cloth. Could she mend, patch, spin? You weren't just sewing clothes, you were sewing value. Girls were often expected to contribute to the household's economy by producing textiles, spinning wool, weaving linen, even dyeing fabrics using crushed plants or powdered rust. And this work wasn't just for noble women with embroidery hoops. Even peasant girls, those without any hope of ever holding a quill, learned to handle thread as a matter of survival. It's funny to imagine, but historians still debate how much of medieval textile production was in the hands of women. Some say women practically clothed all of Europe from the shadows. Others argue their contributions were overcounted or too informal to matter. The truth, like most things, probably lies somewhere in the seams. You shift a little now, feeling the rough texture of the bench beneath you. The girl's mother leans in, showing her again how to turn the hem and make the stitches even. She does it slowly without speaking. No need to rush. They've got all day and a pile of mending that would make you cry. As the light grows stronger, you begin to notice the other lessons hidden inside this moment. Yes, she's learning to sew, but she's also learning patience, precision, endurance, and obedience. Because here's the trick. These weren't just life skills. They were tests of character. A well-sewn shirt meant a well-disciplined girl. And a well-disciplined girl meant a future good wife, good mother, good servant, good subject, which is a little grim. But in this world, small victories mattered. That perfect row of tiny stitches, that was praiseworthy. That pile of neatly stacked linens, a mark of growing maturity. And when your life options are limited to wife, none, or dead, that kind of recognition can feel like gold. Of course, not all girls had the same materials to work with. If you were born to a wealthy household, your needlework might include colored silk threads and elaborate floral patterns. If you were poor, it was mostly coarse wool and patching your brother's socks for the 5th time. But regardless of class, the lesson was clear. Your first schoolroom was the hearth. Your first textbook was a needle. And your first report card, well, it was probably a neatly mended hemline on your father's only tunic. There's a strange kind of comfort in the repetition, stitch after stitch, day after day. The needle dips the thread, pulls, the fabric shifts under fingers that slowly learn their purpose. There's rhythm here, a kind of meditative hum. Even today, some therapists suggest sewing or knitting as a way to reduce anxiety. Medieval girls didn't know the term mindfulness, but their hands moved like they did, back and forth, loop and pull, thread and thought, all woven into one long, quiet day. You let your eyes close just a little now, imagining the sound of thread tugging through cloth, the gentle crackle of a fire, the muffled chatter of hens outside the window, maybe the faint clanging of the village bell signaling morning prayers. You don't need to do anything. You don't even need to understand it all. Just breathe it in. In this world, learning didn't start with parchment and ink. It started with calloused fingers and domestic rituals passed down from woman to child. And while the chroniclers didn't write much about these girls, what they learned, what they made, what they knew, we can still feel them in every silent seam of the past. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're still there, still in the cottage, but time passes differently now. The fire crackles lower, and the smells have changed. A hint of yeast and ash hangs in the air, and you hear the soft thud of dough being slapped against the table. The girl from earlier isn't sewing now. She's grinding something wheat maybe, and her mother is beside her again, not instructing, just watching. Because here comes the next layer of medieval girlhood lessons at mother's knee. Formal education was a rare gift in the Middle Ages, and if you were a girl, it was even rarer. Most learning took place not in classrooms or cloisters, but in kitchens and gardens, and your first teacher, almost always your mother or the woman who raised you, which could just as easily be an older sister, a grandmother, or a cranky aunt with a limp and a collection of whispered warnings. You didn't sit on a bench with chalk and slate. You squatted on your heels beside the wash basin, learning how to scrub without wasting soap. You memorized stories while picking herbs. You learned by mimicking how to cradle a baby, how to fold bread dough, how to keep your voice soft when men were nearby. And, if you were lucky, you learned a few lullabies along the way, though you probably didn't know what half the words meant. Mothers were multitasking masters. Historians often gloss over their role, but without them, the quiet machinery of everyday life would have fallen apart. And while there's still debate about how intentional this education was, were they teaching or just surviving? There's no denying that girls absorbed everything, like cloth absorbs dye. And you sitting in this moment can feel it too. The girl is being shown how to shape small loaves. Her mother doesn't say much. She just moves her hands slowly and deliberately, letting the motion speak. The girl follows, pressing her palms into the dough, imitating the rhythm. It's not perfect. Hers looks more like a collapsed hat than a loaf, but that's fine. She'll get it next time, because there will always be a next time. As the bread rises, she's told how to store it. Not with measurements, but with memory. Once it's cool, wrap it in the linen your aunt stitched and store it where the sun doesn't touch. That's the language of mothers. No charts, no ink, just practical poetry. She asks why the bread cracks sometimes. Her mother shrugs. Too much air, or not enough kneading. Or maybe it's just the weather playing tricks again. That answer may not fly at a modern culinary school, but for this girl, it's enough. There's a kind of gentle indifference in these answers. Not cruel, just tired. Medieval mothers didn't have time for lectures. Life was short. Infants often didn't make it past their first year. And girls, they were expected to marry young bare children and carry on the cycle. Teaching them wasn't about dreams. It was about survival. But still, in those fleeting, quiet hours between chores and meals and mending, there was space for something soft. A bit of laughter, a quiet prayer, a whispered wish that maybe this daughter's life would be slightly easier than her own. You glance at the wall's rough timber and smoke-stained stone. There's no chalkboard, no abacus, but everything here is a lesson. The way herbs hang upside down near the rafters, the way the fire's been banked to last the night, the way water is fetched before anyone's thirsty. All of it speaks. And what's strange is how much you're learning too. You realize that education wasn't just about knowledge, it was about behavior. Don't interrupt. Don't cry too loud. Don't laugh with your mouth open. Don't speak unless spoken to. These lessons weren't written in books, but they were carved into the rhythm of everyday life. Still, not everything was obedience. Girls learned cleverness too, like how to pinch the bread dough to check readiness or how to listen at the door without being seen. These were lessons in subtlety, skills you'd need if your life was shaped by others' decisions. And of course, there was storytelling.
Every girl heard stories while she worked. Stories of saints and witches, stories of hungry wolves and clever maidens, of queens who ruled from behind veils and daughters who tricked cruel fathers. These weren't just for entertainment. They were guidebooks in disguise. And as her hands moved, the girl listened, absorbed, remembered. You breathe in now, letting the scene settle over you like a warm blanket. The bread's almost done. The air smells different, earthy and alive. The girl looks tired, but proud. Her dough didn't collapse this time. You can almost hear her thoughts. Maybe I'm learning. Maybe I'm ready. And maybe, just maybe, the next girl who sits at her knee someday will learn from her too. The warmth of the bread still lingers in the air, though the cottage is quieter now. Outside, birds call out to one another from crooked rooftops. The day is starting to stretch its limbs, but inside, the girl is shifting again, this time toward a different kind of lesson. You notice she's holding a small board now. It's rough, not polished, with a faint coating of chalk dust. And beside her sits an older boy, her brother, perhaps muttering under his breath as he scrawls awkward Latin letters across the surface. His tunic is stained with ink. Her hands, still dough-dusted, hover nervously over the slate, because now comes the rarest lesson of all literacy. In much of medieval Europe, reading was a privilege, and writing well, that was practically a miracle. And for girls, even more so. You had to be lucky. The right family, the right moment, the right connections. Most girls never learned to read their own names, but if your father was a merchant, or a minor noble, or had ambitions involving the church, you might be taught. Just a little. So, here she is, barely 7 tongue between her teeth, trying to remember whether a curl's left or right. You want to help her. You want to say, it's okay. Everyone gets it wrong the first 100 times. But of course she can't hear you. And besides, she has help, sort of. Her brother grumbles beside her, correcting her without looking up. It's not exactly nurturing, but it counts. The chalk squeaks against the board. She erases it, tries again. The A is backward. Again. But she's not giving up. Her family clearly sees value in this, even if only to read prayers or mark a tally in the market ledger. One day she might be responsible for counting linens or recording dowry items. Or maybe, just maybe, she'll read a psalm aloud at her wedding. Literacy was mostly reserved for boys, of course, especially those destined for clergy. But some noble families bent the rules, especially in later centuries. There are records of women composing letters, managing estates, even writing poetry. But for every learned lady, there were thousands who only saw books in the hands of others. And still some girls learned anyway. You see, convents were loopholes. If you were sent to a nunnery, especially from a wealthy family, you might be taught to read scripture, copy religious texts, or sing from liturgical scrolls. And if you stayed long enough, perhaps, because your dowry wasn't big enough for a husband, you could become a teacher yourself. That's how literacy spread in secret, woman to woman, cloister to cloister, quietly. Historians still argue whether girls educated in convents were taught differently than boys in monastic schools.
Were they fed simpler texts? Were they tested less?
Some scholars believe convents were intellectually vibrant spaces. Others think the education was ornamental, just enough to keep women obedient and holy. No one agrees. The records are fragmentary, like a torn manuscript missing all the juicy pages. But what we do know is this girls who read gained a kind of soft power. You turn back to the girl now. She's made progress. Her A is correct. Her eyes light up, not with pride exactly, but with understanding. It's as if something new has clicked into place. A door that was always shut has cracked open. And that's what reading does, isn't it? It lets you imagine things no one tells you, lets you ask questions no one wants to answer. It gives you quiet rebellion, written in the margins of borrowed books. The girl blinks at the board. Her brother has wandered off. The room is quiet again. She draws another A, then writes a shaky M. Maybe she's writing her mother's name. Maybe it's just shapes, but either way, it's a beginning.
You wonder what she'll do with this knowledge.
Will she teach it to her daughter? Will she write letters when her husband is away? Will she secretly copy prayers for the village girls who never had a slate of their own? You'll never know, but the possibility is enough to warm you. In the Middle Ages, words were power. Girls weren't expected to wield that power, but some did anyway, in whispered lessons, in cloistered halls, in stolen moments between kneading and sweeping. And now you've seen one of those moments, so you let yourself settle again. The chalk dust in the air, the quiet joy of a child's discovery, the promise tucked inside each letter. It's enough. More than enough. The light is shifting. Now longer shadows stretch across the wooden floorboards, and you can hear the soft clink of dishes being gathered. Someone outside is chopping kindling. And inside this medieval home, our young girl is learning her next lesson. Not from chalk or stories, but from a needle. Because once the alphabet was half learned and the bread was rising and the chores were done, or at least paused, it was time to sit again and sew. Sewing wasn't just a hobby or a pastime in the Middle Ages. For girls, it was an expectation, a rite of passage, and, let's be honest, a survival skill. Clothes didn't come from shops. They came from hands. And those hands were often small, calloused, and far more skilled than you might imagine. Tonight, the girl is working on a hem, a piece of linen ruff and slightly yellowed curls in her lap. Her stitches aren't even. She frowns, pulls the thread out, and starts again. Her teacher now isn't her mother, but her grandmother, a stern, eagle-eyed woman who seems to have built her personality entirely out of thread tension and raised eyebrows. Grandmother doesn't say much. She just clicks her tongue when the stitch goes crooked. But her hands are quick, her movements exact, and as you watch, it becomes clear this is more than a task. It's a language. In medieval Europe, embroidery was a form of storytelling. Girls stitched symbols into cuffs and collars, lions, flowers, crosses, birds, each with meanings that have mostly been lost to time. A rose might mean purity. A swallow could be a promise. And while historians still debate the full significance of these designs, they agree on one thing. These weren't just decorations. They were messages sown in silence. You can picture the girl learning this. She pricks her finger, winces, then keeps going. She's told that the thread should never tangle because a tangled thread means a tangled fate. Superstition. Maybe. But in an age where so much felt out of control, even a straight seam could feel like an anchor. Sewing wasn't just about clothes either. It was about preparation. Girls made linens for their future households. They embroidered pillowcases, stitched tablecloths, mended socks, and sewed baby clothes long before they had babies of their own. This wasn't a creative outlet. It was a dowry in stitches. And here's a fringe tidbit. There were actually sewing guilds in some cities, and in rare cases, women were members, especially widows, especially if they'd inherited a husband's workshop. Some even trained apprentices. So while most girls sewed in private, a few made it into the professional sphere, quietly, steadily, stitch by stitch. You look closer at the girl's hands now. She's gotten faster. Her needle dips and rises like a gull over water. The fabric folds neatly under her fingers. Grandmother hasn't clicked her tongue in minutes. The room is quiet again, except for the whisper of thread. And in this silence, you start to notice something else, the rhythm of it. There's a meditative quality here. Each stitch is a heartbeat, each hem a pause. In a world full of noise, markets, church bells, shouting, this is a soft, steady breath. Sewing gave girls something precious: control. A square of cloth was a world they could manage. No one could change their pattern. No priest could ban their thread. No husband could unpick their stitches. It was theirs. Of course, the historical record is full of contradictions. Some sources speak of noble girls creating lavish tapestries with gold thread and silken birds. Others describe peasant girls darning socks until their fingers bled. Some stitched to pass time, others to pass the test of usefulness. And historians still arguing, was sewing oppressive, empowering? Were girls confined by it or comforted? Did it bind them or free them? The truth probably is somewhere in the folds. You shift slightly, adjusting your pillow, letting the soft hum of imagined thread lull your thoughts. The girl is nearly finished. Her stitches aren't perfect, but they're hers. She smooths the fabric with a small, proud smile. And just for a moment, as the candle flickers low, you think this isn't boring at all. It's quiet. It's slow. But it's rich with meaning. Every stitch, a sentence. Every pattern, a page. She ties a knot, snips the thread, folds the fabric. Lesson complete. The fire crackles low now. Dinner has been cooked, served, and cleared. Porridge, thick with barley and perhaps a sprinkle of salt, if the family's lucky. The smell lingers in the air, faintly earthy and warm. Outside, the sky has begun to deepen into a muddy twilight. The stars aren't out yet, but the hush that comes before darkness has already started to settle in. You see her again, this time by the hearth. Her hands are folded in her lap and her feet tucked beneath her. She's no longer kneading dough or tracing shaky letters. Instead, she's listening, wide-eyed, mouth slightly open, because now it's time for stories. Storytelling in medieval Europe wasn't just for fun, it was how knowledge moved, how culture traveled, and how girls like her, who had few books and even fewer chances to see the world, learned about everything from saints to serpents, from angels to demons, to men who turned into wolves beneath a full moon. And tonight, her grandfather, stooped, bearded, with a voice like cracked leather, is doing the telling. He leans close to the fire, gesturing with a stick, tracing pictures in the ashes as he speaks. You don't catch every word, but you recognize the tone. It's the kind of tale that twists and turns, warning of witches in the woods and greedy boys who eat without grace. She gasps. He chuckles. Her grandmother rolls her eyes but stays within earshot, pretending not to listen. This isn't random entertainment, it's instruction. Girls were expected to absorb moral lessons early. Don't speak too loud. Don't stray too far. Don't disobey your mother. But the most repeated lesson: don't be curious. Curiosity for medieval girls was a dangerous thing. The stories always punished the ones who peeked into boxes, wandered off paths, or asked too many questions. There's one legend in particular, the tale of Saint Dymphna, a teenage girl who refused her father's advances and fled across the sea. It's said she built a church before he found her and struck her down. Dymphna became a martyr and a symbol of purity. Girls across Europe were told this story not as inspiration, but as warning. But here's the twist. Despite these cautionary tales, stories also became a kind of secret rebellion. Grandmothers added their own flair. Aunts swapped out endings. Girls whispered their own versions behind the chicken coop. A clever girl could tuck her questions into the folds of a fairy tale, and no one would notice. Historians still argue whether these oral traditions allowed girls more agency or simply reinforced their boundaries. Did they give girls a way to understand their world, or just prepare them for obedience? You'll find arguments for both in the footnotes of dusty doctoral theses. You lean closer, drawn in, like the girl by the firelight. The old man's voice is softer now, telling of a woman who disguised herself as a knight and rode into battle. The girl's eyes sparkle. Maybe it's true. Maybe it's nonsense. Either way, it sticks. Because stories did more than entertain, they educated. In villages without schools, they were how children learned weather patterns, herbal remedies, the signs of famine or plague, and most crucially, what people remembered when everything else was lost. And in medieval Europe, things got lost all the time. There's another odd fact you might like. In some regions, women were the primary keepers of folk songs and rhymes. They remembered rituals, lullabies, spells against sickness or heartbreak. These weren't written down. They were passed from mother to daughter, like a wooden spoon or a scarf. The stories themselves were stitched into memory like hems on a garment. The girl by the hearth shifts now, the story reaching its climax. Her hands grip her dress. Her mouth forms a silent "oh," and just for a heartbeat, the whole world feels balanced between imagination and truth. Then the story ends. The room exhales. Someone laughs. A log pops in the fire. You close your eyes, letting the remnants of that tale drift across your mind. You don't remember every detail, neither will she. But the rhythm of it, the rise and fall, the feeling of something ancient settling inside her bones, that stays. Because even in an age without bookshelves, girls learn to carry stories inside them, not on paper, not aloud, but in silence, in memory, in knowing. And that somehow is more powerful than ink. It's night now, not just twilight, but full darkness, thick and quiet. The fire has burned low, reduced to a faint orange glow, and the home's only light comes from a stub of tallow candle flickering on a wooden shelf. Outside you can hear the wind brushing against the walls, soft at first, then harsher, rattling the shutters. The animals are silent. Everyone else is asleep, except her. She lies still on a straw mattress shared with two siblings, wrapped in a wool blanket that smells faintly of sheep. Her eyes are open. Her fingers fidget with a loose thread at the edge of the blanket, because even after the prayers and the porridge and the stories, her mind is busy. She's thinking about the devil. Yes, you heard that right, because in medieval Europe, even sleep came with a warning label. Children, especially girls, were taught that nighttime wasn't just a break from chores. It was a spiritual battlefield. This was the era of demons, in the rafters goblins, under the floorboards, and sins that snuck into your dreams. You were told to sleep on your right side because lying on your left was said to invite Satan himself. And if you woke in the night with your chest tight and breath short, that wasn't anxiety. That was a night hag, a demon, a punishment. She shifts on the mattress, trying not to think too hard, but it's difficult. Every creak in the wood becomes a whisper, every draft a ghost. She remembers her aunt's story from last spring about a girl who forgot to pray before bed and woke with bruises shaped like claws. It's probably just a tale. Probably. Now here's a fact that might surprise you. Some girls were taught protection prayers to say silently if they woke at night. Little rhymes, Latin phrases. A whispered Ave Maria said 3 times before blinking. Even girls too young to read knew these by heart. And then there was the Holy Cross. Not just for display, it was meant to be kissed before sleeping. And if you didn't have one, you could trace it on your chest with your finger. Left shoulder, right shoulder, forehead, heart. In a world where disease came without warning and childbirth could kill, there was a deep comfort in ritual, a sense that something, anything, could be done to hold the darkness back. You wonder if she's doing that now. You can almost feel her lips moving slightly, murmuring words older than the house itself. Her eyes flutter closed just for a second, but then a rooster crows too early, or a log shifts, and she's wide awake again. Let's pause here for a quirky tidbit. In some households, girls were taught that dreams could predict the future. If you dreamed of water, someone was hiding something. If you dreamed of snakes, someone was lying. But if you dreamed of bread, that meant good fortune, unless the bread was burnt. Then you were cursed. Historians still debate how widespread these beliefs were, or whether they were church-sanctioned or just grandmother-made. Some argue that these nighttime rituals were a way to pass on folk wisdom. Others believe they were just leftovers from pre-Christian paganism, barely hidden under the veil of Catholic doctrine. Either way, they stuck. Back in the darkness, the girl finally turns over. Her breath slows. Her fingers stop fidgeting. You sense her slipping toward sleep, carefully, warily, like someone walking across a frozen pond. Because for all its hardness, medieval life gave girls a strange kind of training in uncertainty. They were taught to fear, but also to prepare, to pray, to remember, to repeat the words even if they didn't understand them, to press their fingers together in the dark and wait for morning. And somehow, despite the cold, the fear, and the splinters in the mattress, she does sleep. Eventually. And you're still here, still listening, still drifting through this shadowy corner of the past, where bedtime wasn't just a routine, it was a ritual. The sun rises slowly, hesitantly, as if unsure whether it wants to show its face again. Pale light creeps through the gaps in the shutters, stretching across the floorboards like long fingers. The fire has died to a smudge of ash, and the candle has long since surrendered to the night. But already there's movement, a cough, a yawn, the creak of wooden limbs rising from straw. She stirs with the rest, rubbing sleep from her eyes, her fingers still clutching that same thread from last night. And then, without delay, the day begins. Because for medieval girls, mornings weren't gentle. There was no leisurely brushing of hair or sipping of warm drinks by the window. There were animals to feed water, to carry fires, to stoke. And often, before anything else, prayers. You sit up stretching in the cold, rough air of the single-room home. Someone opens the door, letting in a gust of wind that smells like soil and smoke. The hens cluck indignantly. A goat bleats. Somewhere nearby, a bell tolls for morning mass. She's already moving. Her feet are bare, stepping carefully around slivers and stones. Her mother hands her a bundle coarse fabric to be washed at the stream. No need for words. She knows her duties. And here's your mainstream fact of the day. In rural medieval Europe, girls began doing household labor as young as 6. Not pretend chores, real ones. Firewood, foraging, minding infants, spinning flax, grinding grain with handstones heavy enough to make your arms ache. Education wasn't just about books or stories. It was muscle memory, repetition, routine. But here's the quirk: in some villages, girls were apprenticed to elderly women, not formally, not like boys with blacksmiths, but socially. These older women, often widows or herbalists, taught them the deeper things: how to bind wounds, how to mix a poultice from garlic and pig fat, how to know if a child's fever meant death or just bad cheese. You can picture it now. The girl crouching beside a wrinkled woman with clouded eyes, learning how to turn nettles into soup and lye into soap. It wasn't glamorous, but it was survival. And that's what much of a medieval girl's education boiled down to: how to survive, not how to thrive, not how to flourish, just how to not die, preferably with grace. There's another oddity. Many of these girls knew more about practical medicine than the men who ran the village church. They knew which herbs numbed pain, which mushrooms could kill. They knew when to call the midwife, when to boil water, when to run. Historians still argue whether this passed down knowledge was systematically suppressed later as formal medicine became male-dominated. Some say yes, that these women were sidelined, called witches, erased from record. Others say their roles simply faded as cities grew and universities rose. The debate continues, scribbled in margins and footnotes. But you're watching her walk to the stream now, balancing that bundle on her hip like it's part of her. She hums, a little off-key but with rhythm. A song she heard from her cousin last week, maybe. Or a lullaby turned work tune. Her hands are red from the cold water. Her arms ache from lifting stones. But she's not alone. Other girls are there too, their chatter bouncing like pebbles off the surface of the stream. They laugh. They splash. They swap secrets in whispers, too low for you to hear. It's a kind of school in its own way. And just like that, education slips through the back door of history. Not in classrooms, not with quills and scrolls, but here, in the bend of the stream, in the rhythm of the millstone, in the calloused fingers of a girl who might never learn to read, but who will know how to live. After the stream comes the silence. You're back in the house now, or rather, the space that functions as house, classroom, workshop, and infirmary, all in one. The fire has been relit. A pot simmers with something thick and gray. Oats, maybe, or yesterday's root stew reimagined for breakfast. The girl kneels near the hearth, blowing gently to feed the flame, her face glowing orange with reflected light. There's soot on her cheek unnoticed. In many homes, this was the calm between waves of labor, a time to patch garments, mend tools, or for the lucky sight and learn something. And here comes your mainstream fact. While formal schooling was rare for girls, especially in rural areas, some did receive instruction if the family was wealthy or devout, or both. Nuns taught in convents. Occasionally, tutors were hired, but most girls, especially poor ones, learned from their mothers. And so she does. You watch her sit beside her mother now, a scrap of homespun cloth in her lap. Her fingers tremble slightly as she threads a bone needle. She's learning to sew, not just because clothes tear, but because stitches mean status. Neat, straight ones reflect a good girl, a marriageable girl, a future mother who will pass this on to another generation and another. Hold it taut, her mother says softly, guiding her hand, and breathe. That last part seems unnecessary until you realize she's been holding her breath with every stitch. Here's a strange little tidbit. In some towns, girls were taught to sew their own burial shrouds as a rite of passage, just in case. Not as a morbid gesture, but as a sign of maturity. To be ready, because death wasn't abstract. It was common, familiar, personal. Still, our girl today isn't stitching a shroud. She's repairing her younger brother's tunic. It smells like livestock and sweat. She winces, but doesn't complain. That, too, is part of her education, learning not just how to do, but how to endure. Now look across the room. There by the window is her grandmother hunched over a spindle. The thread dances between gnarled fingers and a drop-weighted shaft. This, too, is a lesson. Not just the making of thread, but the rhythm of patience, of waiting, of keeping your hands moving, even when your mind wants to wander. Some historians suggest this domestic labor was seen as spiritually valuable, that a silent, busy girl was more likely to be perceived as pious, a future mother of saints. Others argue that it was a form of social control. Train the girls early, and they won't question later. You watch her shift her weight, scratch her ankle with the back of one foot. She's still a child after all, but there's no paper to doodle on, no time to dawdle. Her mother hands her another piece of fabric. Again, she says, and the girl nods. Outside, the wind picks up again. A neighbor's rooster crows late and confused. Someone shouts something about a loose pig. The world beyond the house feels chaotic, full of mud and loud men and unpredictable weather. But inside there's a kind of order, small, quiet, repetitive, but comforting in its way. And so she sews and listens and learns, because even if no one ever writes her name down, even if she never sets foot inside a stone school or touches a book, this is her education. This is her classroom. Fire, fabric, patience. The bells in the distance toll again, low and hollow, like a memory echoing across the hills. You glance up, half expecting to see something shift in the shadows. But it's just another morning drawing onward, and the girl is once again on the move. Today is different, though. She's not headed to the fields or the stream. Instead, her mother braids her hair with a touch more care, smoothing it flat with wet fingers. Her dress is the same as always, but the apron is cleaner, and her shoes, well, they're shoes which is notable. Most days, she's barefoot. They're walking toward the edge of the village where the path grows narrower, flanked by a stone wall and a hedgerow of hawthorn. The air smells of turned soil and sheep. There's a building up ahead, taller than the houses with thick gray walls, and a wooden door that looks too heavy for its hinges. You step carefully behind them, your feet crunching the gravel. A cross is etched into the lintel. This is a nunnery. Here comes your mainstream fact. In the medieval period, a minority of girls, typically from noble or wealthy families, were sent to convents. There, they might learn to read and write, especially Latin prayers and psalms. For some, it was an educational opportunity. For others, a spiritual obligation or a lifelong assignment decided before they could even walk. Inside, it's dim and cool. Candles flicker along the walls. The scent of beeswax and musty parchment lingers in the air. A nun face, serene but unsmiling, beckons them in. The girl's eyes widen. She's never seen so many books, not real ones. The bindings are thick, cracked. The ink shines faintly under the light. One book lies open on a lectern, red letters swirling across the page like dancing vines. It looks like magic. She's not here to become a nun, not yet. This is just a visit, a chance. Her father rarely home, but influential, has pulled some strings. A sister here once knew his mother, and so the door creaks open a sliver wider than usual. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some girls entered convent schools as a form of social storage. If a noble family had too many daughters and too few dowries, sending one to a convent temporarily was a respectable delay tactic. Occasionally, these temporary stays turned permanent without the girl's consent. Our girl today sits quietly on a bench, fingers folded, watching as another girl her age reads aloud from a vellum scroll. The words are foreign, tangled Latin, but the rhythm, the rise and fall of each line, feels soothing, almost hypnotic. She wants to ask what it means, but she doesn't, because asking questions here is a delicate thing. It's better to watch, to mimic, to be silent until spoken to. Historians still debate whether convent education truly empowered these girls or merely prepared them for piety. Some argue that literacy opened doors, especially in an era where women's voices were largely ignored. Others suggest that even literate nuns copied texts rather than composing their own. The ink flowed, but not always with freedom. Still, you can't deny the awe on the girl's face. She's handed a wax tablet and a stylus. The nun shows her how to press gently to form letters. It's harder than it looks. The lines come out wobbly, like seaweed swaying underwater. But she tries again and again. The nun smiles just barely. Outside, the bells toll again. A reminder that time doesn't wait, not even here. The girl and her mother rise. They thank the sisters. They leave quietly. Back on the path, the girl's hands still remember the feel of the stylus. Her mind echoes with half-understood syllables. Domine, Gloria, Sanctus. She doesn't know what they mean, but she knows she wants to. And maybe
Just maybe she will. The wind carries stories, if you know how to listen. It's evening again, and the girl is seated beside the hearth, her lap full of mending, her fingers moving slower now that the light is thin. The rest of the household is busy with their end-of-day rituals, scrubbing pots, counting out lentils, tucking smaller children into beds of straw and cloth scraps. But the girl, her mind is somewhere else. Earlier today, while running an errand past the baker's lane, she caught sight of something strange. A traveling peddler had stopped in the village square, surrounded by sacks and baskets, and one small box that snapped open like a treasure chest. And inside books, not religious ones, not official, not approved. These were stories. Now you've heard the mainstream version reading for pleasure wasn't a widespread phenomenon in medieval Europe, especially not for girls. Books were scarce, expensive, and usually controlled by monasteries, universities, or wealthy men. If a girl read anything, it was often devotional, a book of hours, a psalter, maybe a Saints' Lives anthology. But even then, access required privilege. Still, the world is never quite as tidy as textbooks would like it to be. Here's a fringe tidbit for you, despite church regulations. Tales of romance, adventure, and trickery circulated in the form of oral stories, handwritten chapbooks, or smuggled scrolls, especially in urban centers. These were often frowned upon, deemed frivolous or dangerous, and for girls, entirely unsuitable, which of course made them irresistible. So, when the girl leaned in close to that peddler's box and saw a thin booklet with a crude drawing of a knight on the front, she knew she shouldn't ask, but she did. "How much for that one?" He squinted at her. "You can't read." "I can try." He paused, then shrugged. "One egg a day." An egg. She could manage that. She raced home, filched one from the pile meant for morning trade, and returned breathless, her hand outstretched. He gave her the booklet, still warm from the sun. She hasn't shown it to her mother. Not yet. The pages are rough hand-copied by someone who probably wasn't paid well for their penmanship. The letters lean and sprawl. The ink smudges in places. But the story about a girl who dresses as a boy and sneaks into a royal court to avenge her father is unlike anything she's ever encountered. She can't read it all. Some words are mysteries, but she pieces together enough. And she stares at the little drawings in the margins, battles, feasts, kisses that make her cheeks flush. Historians still debate whether girls like her truly read these stories or simply stared at them, trying to absorb meaning through sheer will. But maybe it doesn't matter, because what she's doing isn't just reading, it's imagining, it's daring, it's rewriting what's possible. She tucks the booklet into her apron when her brother calls her name. She returns to her work. The wool is scratchy. The fire crackles. Her mother sighs nearby, but part of her is still in that story sword, raised riding through a moonlit forest, dressed not in rags, but in armor. Maybe tomorrow she'll try to copy a sentence from it onto a scrap of wood with charcoal. Maybe she'll whisper a line aloud while pretending to stir the stew.
Maybe she'll tell her little sister the story one night, changing the ending to something even braver. The wind rustles outside. It doesn't know what's hidden in her apron pocket, but she does, and that's enough. The sky is thick with the smell of rain. You lean your head against the cold wooden beam of the cottage, watching droplets slide slowly down the thatched edge of the roof. They fall with quiet rhythm, tick, 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 into a shallow bowl someone forgot outside. The girl is inside today. The roads are too muddy and the animals too restless for much outdoor work. So she's doing what countless girls across medieval Europe did when the weather turned learning by watching. You're in the kitchen, if you can call it that, a dark corner with a hearth, a spit, a clay oven cracked at one side, and a wooden table warped from years of water and knife marks. The girl's mother is busy. She moves between tasks with the tired grace of someone who's done this every day of her life. She doesn't explain, she doesn't narrate, but her daughter watches, soaks up every motion like linen takes dye. And this is where your mainstream fact makes its entrance for the vast majority of medieval girls. Education didn't happen in schools or convents. It happened at home through observation, repetition, and expectation. Girls learned how to bake, spin sew, tend fires, mix simple poultices, and calculate seasonal rhythms long before they understood the difference between a consonant and a vowel. The girl kneels beside her mother now, hands dusted in flour. They're making flatbread, cheap, coarse, flavored only by smoke and whatever herbs the goats haven't trampled. Her mother shows her how to press with her palm, how to spread the dough thin so it doesn't puff unevenly in the heat. The girl tries. Her circles are lopsided. One looks vaguely like a boot, but her mother doesn't scold. She lets the girl try again and again. Outside, thunder grumbles like an old man. A chicken squawks indignantly from its perch under the table. Now for a quirky tidbit in some parts of medieval England and Scandinavia, young girls were taught how to make protective bread runes, symbols scratched into loaves with a knife tip to ward off evil spirits or ensure good crops. These weren't spells exactly, but they weren't nothing either. More like a blend of faith folklore and desperate hope. Our girl has heard of them. She's even tried to etch a spiral once, though her mother brushed it away before the dough hit the pan. That's nonsense, she'd said. Bake with skill, not magic. But still the girl wonders. Maybe if she presses the edges just right, the bread won't burn this time. Over the fire, a small pot simmers. Root vegetables, mostly. On a lucky day, a few shreds of salted meat. On a feast day, maybe fish. But not today. The girl stirs carefully, adding a pinch of something greenish she doesn't quite recognize. Her mother lets her. It's not that it matters, it's that it teaches. Historians still debate whether this form of domestic apprenticeship was empowering or simply oppressive. Some argue that early exposure to household responsibility gave girls a practical education, one rooted in survival and community. Others point out that it locked them into rigid gender roles before they had a chance to explore anything else. But from where you're standing, it's clear the girl is learning. Her hands are steadier, her eyes sharper, her confidence a quiet little ember, burns more surely with each task done well. When the bread is ready, they eat in silence. The rain hums against the roof like lullabies from another world. Later, the girl tucks a piece of flatbread into her apron, not because she's hungry, because she made it. And when you're 10 years old, in the Middle Ages, that's a kind of miracle. As the sky darkens, her mother hands her a needle and thread. "Practice the hem," she says, and so the girl sits her back straight, her stitches uneven but improving, thread by thread, lesson by lesson. One quiet day at a time. You wake before the sun. There's a cold spot on the floor where your bare feet land, and the embers in the hearth are just whispers of heat. But no one complains, not even the chickens still huddled in the corner like feathered pillows. The girl is already up, and today she's going somewhere new. You follow her out quietly, the chill biting through the worn wool of her shawl. Her mother gave permission the night before she could visit the manor house for the day help in the kitchens, maybe fetch water, maybe learn something. It's a rare chance, and the girl knows it. This is not the fairy tale castle you're imagining. The manor house is large, yes, but only by the standards of a village that thinks 2 rooms and a roof without holes is luxury. The manor has stone walls that sweat in winter, narrow slits for windows, and guards who mostly look bored. Still, to the girl, it's another planet. And here's your mainstream fact. Noble households often relied on lower-class children, usually girls, as part-time servants, scullery maids, or errand runners. It wasn't formal employment. It was closer to a social transaction. You help us. We maybe help you. Sometimes these experiences led to full-time positions, marriage arrangements, or simply a little extra food for the family. Sometimes they led nowhere. Inside the manor's kitchen, it's chaos wrapped in heat. Boiling pots, sharp knives, barking orders. The cook is shaped like a wine barrel and twice as loud. She waves the girl toward a tub of turnips. Peel them, fast. The girl nods, grabs a knife too big for her hand and begins. This is not needlework. This is not flatbread. This is pressure and risk. A mistake here means scalding water, lost fingers, or a week's punishment. The girl breathes slowly, mimicking the motions of the older kitchen help. Peel down, not across. Keep your thumb tucked. A turnip rolls off the table. She catches it with her foot. The cook sees and snorts. At least you're not slow. Somewhere in the back, a pastry is being formed, shaped like a bird stuffed with onions and fish. One of the manor children wanders in, snatches a warm roll, and vanishes before the cook can yell. Now the quirky tidbit in some noble households' kitchen girls were tasked with whispering prayers over meals to protect the food from envy or curses. Especially during feast days, it was thought that a silent blessing might keep sour wine from causing stomach aches or prevent a rival from poisoning a roast. The girl doesn't get to do that today, but she hears an older girl mutter a rhyme over the stew and pretend to cross herself while smirking. Is it superstition? Is it safety? Or just a joke to break up the day? Historians still argue whether these tasks gave poor girls a glimpse of power, however minor, or simply reinforced their low status. There are accounts of kitchen maids who became confidants to noble women, even rose through the household ranks. But for most, this was just another rung on the ladder of survival. By midday, the girl's hands are red from steam and her back aches from stooping. But she hasn't cut herself. She hasn't been sent home. And that's victory enough. In the corner, someone brings in a box of spices. Actual spices, not just salt or herbs from the hedgerow. The girl catches a whiff of cinnamon. Her mouth waters, not because she knows the taste, but because it smells like stories. The cook tosses her a crust of sweet bread, too small for anyone else to want. The girl bites into it slowly, trying to make the moment stretch. Sugar, real sugar. She's not allowed in the great hall, but she glimpses it, just a flash of tapestry and polished wood of someone in velvet laughing too loud. It's a world away. When her chores are done, she's handed a potato and a rag. Wipe the soot from your face before you go, the cook says. The girl obeys. On the way home, the potato goes into her apron too, not because it's valuable, but because she earned it. Tomorrow, it will be back to bread dough and mending. But today, she touched a different life. And sometimes that's the start of everything. The morning starts with the creak of a spinning wheel and the soft thump of wool against the floor. You're in a small, smoke-stained cottage where every corner smells faintly of sheep and ash. The girl is back home seated beside her grandmother, who is carding wool with stiff, rhythmic strokes. The girl watches her fingers, twitching with curiosity. Today she's learning the one thing every medieval girl was expected to master by adolescence: how to make cloth. Here's your mainstream fact. In medieval Europe, spinning and weaving weren't hobbies. They were survival skills. Most peasant families didn't buy fabric. They made it thread by thread. Spinning yarn was considered so vital to a girl's role that it literally shaped language. The word spinster originally just meant a woman who spins. That's it. It only later became shorthand for an unmarried woman because spinsters were usually single and self-reliant. The wool is rough today. Early shearing. It tangles and snaps and stinks of rain. But the grandmother is patient, humming something tuneless while she works. The girl mimics her motions. Pinch, twist, pull. Again, pinch, twist, pull. Her yarn is lumpy, but it holds. Over time, the motion becomes meditative, like threading thoughts through your fingers. The spinning wheel sings a low, sleepy hum, perfect background music for forgetting the world for a while. Now for something a little stranger, a quirky tidbit in parts of the Low Countries. Some families believed that if a girl's first hand-spun thread was too knotty or uneven, it could curse her future marriage. So they burned the first skein or buried it near a river to wash away the bad luck. Grandmother doesn't believe in that. She says it's the man's job to deserve the wife, not the wife's job to make perfect yarn. The girl likes that. Outside, it's one of those days where the sky can't decide if it's raining or just sulking. Light drizzles sweep in and out like bored ghosts. Inside the hearth flickers to life. Grandmother tosses a few dried herbs into the flame, not because it helps the fire, but because it makes the room smell nicer. A little lavender, a little thyme. The cloth they're making isn't for sale. It's not fancy. It's not dyed. It's going to become a shift, a long underdress the girl will wear until it tears beyond mending. Maybe 3 years, maybe 4. Depends on how fast she grows. Historians still debate whether spinning gave girls independence or chained them to endless domestic labor. Some say it was empowering. They created something tangible, essential, often bartered for food or favors. Others argue it became a symbol of confinement, a constant reminder that a girl's world was measured in skeins and seams. You can almost hear both sides whispering in the rhythm of the wheel. Later, when her fingers ache and her back tightens, the girl sets the yarn aside and helps grandmother boil lye soap from ashes. It smells foul. It works miracles on linen. It also strips the skin from your knuckles if you're careless. But she doesn't complain. Instead, she asks to try weaving. Grandmother laughs, an honest, surprised laugh, and pulls back a heavy curtain to reveal the old loom. Dusty, sturdy, waiting. The girl climbs onto the bench and touches the wooden frame like it's sacred. And maybe it is, in a way. This loom has seen births, deaths, weddings. Every family story is probably tangled in its joints somewhere. Under grandmother's guidance, she threads the shuttle through presses. The pedal watches, the warp and weft, catch each other like lovers holding hands. Outside, the rain grows louder. Inside, the cloth grows longer. She won't finish it today. Maybe not this month. But the rhythm, the practice, that's the real lesson. You don't just weave linen here. You weave patience. You weave time. You weave the soft, strong net that will one day catch your adult self and say, "You made this. You mattered." By now the seasons have shifted. The light has changed. The air smells faintly of damp wood, old apples, and smoke curling from thatch roofs. You're a girl, yes, yours now, because you've been following her this far. She's growing, not just taller, quieter. She walks with the confidence of someone who has opinions, but also knows when to keep them to herself. That too is something learned. Today she's allowed into the church, not just to attend Mass. She's going with the village women to help clean and polish the sanctuary, an act that's half duty, half honor. For a poor girl, it's rare access to a space full of power and stories and questions she's not supposed to ask. Inside the church, is colder than outside. Always is. The walls sweat even in summer. The altar smells like beeswax and old wine, and the candles seem to whisper secrets in a language made of flickering shadows. Her job is simple: wipe down the pews, scrub the stone near the font, sweep the bits of dirt and moss dragged in by countless muddy boots. And now here's your historical anchor: in medieval villages, churches weren't just religious centers. They were social hubs, places of refuge, courtrooms, town halls. They were also among the only buildings made of stone, often the only place with written words displayed openly, Latin inscriptions, biblical illustrations, stained glass depictions of saints who always looked suspiciously like wealthy landowners. For many girls, the church was the first place they saw books. Not that she can read them, yet. That brings us to today's quirky tidbit. In some parishes, it was believed that if a girl swept the church too thoroughly, she might sweep out the spirit of generosity, and the town's tithes would decline. So, elders would quietly instruct her to leave a little dust under the altar. Superstition or budget strategy. You decide. The girl doesn't know this. She's scrubbing with full intensity, tongue poking out slightly at the corner of her mouth, the way she does when focused. A village woman stops her. "That's clean enough, child," she says, nudging her toward the choir pews. The girl sits for a moment, catching her breath. Her eyes wander upward. There, in the curve of the apse, she sees them, painted saints with golden halos, eyes full of patience or pity or something else entirely. The figures are chipped and fading. Time eats art like fire eats wood, but they're still watching. This is her classroom now, and here comes your scholarly debate. Some historians argue that informal exposure to religious art and performance in church services gave girls a rudimentary form of moral education, even narrative structure, storytelling instinct. Others believe this exposure reinforced a strict hierarchy that kept women intellectually dependent on male clergy and tradition. The truth, like most things, probably lives in the middle. The girl stands again, walks past the pulpit, traces her finger along a carved stone column. It's been smoothed by generations of hands. Even touch can become inheritance. Someone opens the side door. Wind rushes in. The candles shudder. Time to go. Before she leaves, the girl kneels, not out of obedience, but out of ritual. It feels right. Her hands clasp. She doesn't know the Latin, not really. But she hums a tune she's heard the priest mumble before and lets it blend with the echoes bouncing off stone. Outside, the women nod approvingly. "She's a good one says. Maybe she is. Later, in the dark of her cottage, she'll dream of saints with moving eyes and cathedrals full of books. She won't tell anyone. Some dreams are too delicate to survive the morning. But she'll remember how it felt to be inside the stone, to see the light filter through colored glass, to imagine just for a breath that she might someday Read the words carved on the wall. That's a different kind of hunger. And now it's hers. Another winter is coming. You can feel it in the bones of the cottage, in the way the wind seems to scrape at the shutters like a dog begging for shelter. The fields have gone quiet, the trees bare and skeletal. Inside, the girl wraps herself in wool that smells faintly of damp sheep and lye soap. But winter doesn't mean rest. It means learning something new. Today, she's going to cook, not just stir a pot or peel a root she's been doing. That since she was strong enough to lift a wooden spoon. No, today she'll learn to manage the hearth itself, the centerpiece of every medieval home, the source of light, warmth, nourishment, and sometimes burns. Here's your historical fact. Medieval cooking for poor families revolved around the hearth, which often sat in the middle of a one-room house. There were no stoves, no chimneys, just a central fire pit, a few iron hooks, maybe a tripod. Meals weren't plated. They were ladled into shared bowls or eaten from trenchers, stale bread used as edible plates. The girl kneels beside the fire, poking at embers with a stick that used to be part of a broom. She's nervous. The hearth is a living thing. It hisses, it spits, it sulks when ignored. Getting it to the right temperature is a kind of witchcraft. Too hot, and you burn the stew. Too cold, and you eat raw turnip water. Grandmother demonstrates adding logs at just the right angle. She hangs a pot from a blackened hook and drops in a mix of barley onions, a single carrot, and a fistful of dried beans. Meat. Not today. Maybe on Sunday if the peddler comes through with rabbit. And here's your tidbit. In some parts of rural France, families believed that if a girl stirred the stew counterclockwise, it would cause arguments in the house. Always clockwise, always with your right hand. The girl tests this rule when no one's looking, just to see if anything happens. Nothing does. Not yet, anyway. The smell is comforting, earthy, soft, slightly sour from the fermented cabbage tucked in for flavor. They call it pottage. It's never quite the same from one day to the next. Ingredients shift. The pot never fully empties. It's like a rolling memory, always absorbing the present. Now here's the debate historians still argue whether medieval peasant girls learned more from repetition or from improvisation in the kitchen. Recipes weren't written down. Instructions were oral, instinctive. Was this a lack of structure or a deep form of embodied knowledge passed through generations? Back at the hearth, the girl is gaining confidence. She tastes, wrinkles her nose, adds salt. Not too much salt is precious. Traded, stored, guarded like treasure. She slices a piece of hard bread to float on top and grins as it softens in the bubbling broth. Outside, snow begins to fall. Inside, the stew thickens. When it's ready, the family gathers around, dipping spoons, tearing bread, eating silently, except for the occasional hum of appreciation. This isn't a feast. It's nourishment. It's continuity. The same meal her mother made, and her grandmother, and likely every woman before them, back to some ancestor whose name is lost, but whose hands once stirred a pot just like this. The girl glances at the fire. It crackles low, satisfied. She fed it, and now it's feeding them. Later, as they settle into the hush of a winter night, someone knocks at the door. A traveler, cloaked in snow. They offer him broth. He blesses the house. She watches him eat, and she wonders, not for the first time, what meals taste like in castles. Then again, she thinks they probably don't come with stories like this one. Morning arrives slowly in winter. The sun takes its time climbing over the frost-bitten rooftops, as though it too would rather stay under the covers. But the girl is already up, breath misting in the cold air, fingers stiff as she pulls on a coarse wool shift. Today isn't a market day. It isn't a feast day. But it is a special day because she's learning how to mend. Not just patching a tear with an awkward stitch. Not just tying a rag around a broken sandal. No, today she's learning how to actually fix something so well that no one notices it was ever broken. Which, let's be honest, is basically medieval therapy. She sits by the window where the weak light is just strong enough to see by. In her lap, a tunic full of holes, more air than fabric in some places. Her job is to make it wearable again, with nothing more than a needle, some rough thread, and sheer willpower. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Cloth was incredibly valuable in the Middle Ages. For peasants, garments were worn repaired, passed down resewn, and repurposed until they literally fell apart. A dress might become a shirt, then a rag, then a bit of padding for shoes. Throwing clothes away was unthinkable. She threads the needle slowly, tongue peeking out in concentration. The thread frays. The needle pricks her finger. She doesn't cry, just sucks on it, scowls, and tries again. Next to her, her aunt demonstrates a darning stitch, carefully weaving the thread across a hole until it blends with the fabric. It's not just sewing, it's storytelling. Every patch says, this mattered enough to save. Now for the odd tidbit, in some English villages it was believed that if a girl sewed by candlelight after sundown, she'd stitch bad luck into the fabric. Something about shadows getting trapped in the thread. Whether that was just an excuse to save candles, who knows? The girl sews anyway. Each stitch is a whisper. Each knot is a decision. Fix it well enough, and it doesn't unravel later. And here's the scholarly debate for today. Historians still argue whether peasant girls gained agency through domestic crafts like sewing or were confined by them. Was stitching a skill that gave them pride and economic usefulness, or just another thread in the web that kept them tethered to labor? She doesn't think about that. She's too focused on the tunic. The light shifts. The hole is gone, sort of, covered now by careful stitches and a tiny piece of cloth, stolen from an old curtain. She shows it to her aunt. A nod. No words, just a nod. That's the highest praise available. By afternoon, she's onto a sock, then a shawl, then just for fun, She adds a little embroidered star
in the corner of a handkerchief. It's not part of the job. No one asked for it, but it makes her smile. A secret signature, a small rebellion. That night by the fire, her fingers ache, but the pile of mended clothes is warm and solid and proud. She falls asleep, dreaming of colors of flax and linen of wool, dyed with onion skin of robes she'll never wear, but can picture perfectly. And maybe, just maybe one day, she'll stitch something new instead of fixing something old. Maybe that's what hope feels like. You're kneeling in the dark dirt behind the cottage again, but this time it's not for planting or pulling weeds. It's for collecting roots, mostly, and the odd sprig of something green that looks like it might help soothe a cough, or maybe make someone hallucinate for 3 days. Who knows? Today you're not just a peasant girl. You're an apprentice in the mysterious world of medieval herbal lore. No potions, no bubbling cauldrons. Just a few leaves, a lot of trial and error, and probably a few unintentional side effects. Let's start with a fact. Most rural households in medieval Europe relied on cunning women, or wise women, who knew the local plants and their uses. While these women weren't formally educated, their knowledge was passed down orally, deeply respected, and occasionally feared. The girl's grandmother is one of those women. And today she's teaching the girl how to make an onion poultice. For what? Well, anything really. Sore throat, chest congestion, evil spirits. If you squint hard enough, they crush the onions, mix them with a bit of mustard seed, and smear the mess onto cloth. It stinks. The girl's eyes water. But somehow it feels powerful, like they're doing something important. And now the quirky tidbit in parts of Bavaria, it was common to bury a clove of garlic under the threshold of the house during childbirth to scare the bad air away. Not the bad spirits, the bad air. Which honestly feels like a solid medieval logic leap. The girl gathers nettle carefully through a cloth, because those little barbs bite, and lays them out to dry. Her grandmother murmurs plant names in Latin, or maybe just in made-up Latin. It doesn't matter. What matters is the rhythm, the belief, the ritual. They bundle herbs with string, hang them from the beams to dry. Sage for cleansing, thyme for strength, lavender for rest. Though she's never smelled lavender, it's just a word for now. Historians still argue whether women's herbal knowledge in the Middle Ages gave them social power or made them targets for suspicion. Some became midwives, healers, even unofficial doctors. Others were accused of witchcraft for the same skills. One town's angel was another town's heretic. The girl doesn't know about that. She just knows that when her baby brother was sick last month, her grandmother made a tea from fennel and honey, and he got better. That's enough for her. As the day ends, she lays out crushed marigold petals to dry on the windowsill. They'll go into a salve for skin rashes. She feels proud, a little more grown up. That night she whispers plant names under her breath like spells. Chamomile, comfrey,
Wormwood. She sleeps deeply, dreams of gardens that never die. The village bell rings at dawn, sharp and echoing through the frosted fields. But today it doesn't signal church or market or danger. It rings because someone has died. Again, you wrap yourself in your shawl and step outside. The air is damp with sorrow. There's no wailing, not yet, but everyone knows. The baker's door is closed. No bread today, no warm rolls or honeyed loaves, just the cold and the waiting. The girl stands with her mother in the threshold, not quite inside, not quite out. She's seen this before. The body will be washed, dressed in the best available clothes, which, to be clear, are still made of scratchy homespun and laid out on a simple wooden board. Let's ground it in a fact. In the medieval period, especially in peasant communities, death was handled entirely at home. Professional undertakers, not a thing. The family did everything. Washing the body, preparing it, sitting vigil overnight. It was raw and real and honestly, emotionally brutal. And yet there was structure. Today the girl helps fetch water from the well. She carries it carefully, the cold sloshing over her fingers. She helps gather rosemary, if it's available, or more often just stale mint or dried rushes to place near the body. Not for magic, for the smell.
Now, your quirky tidbit. It was once common in parts of rural France to put a slice of bread on the chest of the deceased and let the village dog eat it, believing this would carry off the soul's sins. Was it sanitary? Absolutely not. Did people believe it worked? For a while, yes. Back in the cottage, candles are lit. Not many wax is expensive. Just tallow stubs. Their flickering light casts strange shadows on the girl's face as she helps her mother adjust the cloth around the old man's shoulders. He wasn't a relative, just a neighbor. But in a village like this, everyone is kind of family. The room is quiet, still. And here's the scholarly tension historians still debate whether these community-led death rituals provided genuine comfort or simply reinforced fear of sin and eternal damnation. Were peasants reassured by the rituals or just terrified into obedience? The girl doesn't know that either. She just knows that she's not afraid of the body. It looks tired, like a worn-out blanket finally folded away. She isn't sure if she believes in heaven, but she likes the idea of someone resting, really resting. As night falls, the vigil begins. People take turns sitting with the body, whispering prayers, swapping stories, eating a little stew if someone remembered to bring it. The girl sits near the corner, quiet listening. She wonders if the old man had stories he never told, songs he never finished, things he meant to do. Outside, owls call. Inside, someone begins to hum a tune. Not sacred, just familiar. And for a few hours, the house feels fuller than it has in years. The morning fog clings to the earth like a secret curling around the corners of the thatched cottages and hanging low over the damp ground. You can taste the chill in the air as you step outside, a hint of wood smoke and wet leaves. But today there's a pulse beneath it all, something quiet but unmistakable. A wedding is coming. Not yours, of course.
You're still too young for that.
But old enough to help. Old enough to notice the way the bride looks, both thrilled and terrified. And old enough to wonder what it really means to be married in a world like this. Let's start with a historical fact. In medieval peasant villages, marriages were more about land alliances and survival than love. While noble marriages were usually arranged for politics, peasant unions had their own logic: less gold, more goats. A union wasn't complete until it was witnessed by the community, often outside the church, followed by celebration, and yes, some very public symbols of what was to come. The girl helps sweep the common path. She strings dried flowers together, marigolds and feverfew, and wraps them into a simple garland. The bride wears no veil, no satin, just her cleanest dress, and the look of someone stepping off a cliff and hoping for soft ground below. Now here's your quirky tidbit. In certain parts of medieval Scandinavia, brides would carry a pouch of breadcrumbs and salt hidden in their dress to feed the marriage spirits and prevent quarrels. One for each expected argument, supposedly, which means some brides carried a lot of crumbs. As the wedding begins, the entire village gathers. There's no dearly beloved, just a few prayers, a blessing, and a feast that follows if they're lucky. The girl watches as the couple drinks from a shared wooden cup. She knows what comes next: dancing, laughter, and probably someone falling into the fire pit. The girl's mother nudges her to help with the food. She carries a dish of turnips and stewed apples to the table. It smells sharp and sweet, earthy and comforting. She likes weddings. They feel like borrowed joy, even if only for a day. But here's the debate. Historians still chew on: were medieval peasant weddings truly celebratory events, or more obligatory transactions wrapped in ritual? Was the joy real or merely staged? Because the alternative loneliness was worse. As evening falls, the bride and groom are escorted to their small home with much teasing and song. The girl listens to the laughter, the songs echoing in the twilight. She wonders what kind of wife she'll be, or if she'll marry at all. Some girls become midwives, some become weavers, some never marry, some do and regret it. The girl doesn't know her future, but tonight, under the shimmer of lantern light and the smell of roasted onions, she feels something that almost resembles hope. And she sleeps dreaming of a garland that never wilts. You wake before the sun. The hearth is cold, and your breath fogs in the air. Outside, frost clings to the grass like silver lace. Your bones ache, not from age, but from the weight of every chore, every silence, every unseen labor that stacks itself on your shoulders like firewood. But there's no room for staying in bed. Not now. Not ever. Today you carry a basket to the edge of the woods.
The trees are bare, but the underbrush still offers hidden gifts. If you know where to look, mushrooms with gilled caps, bark that peels like paper, and moss that keeps your fingers warm for just a moment. Let's anchor in a final fact. Medieval peasants, especially women, were the unnoticed machinery of daily life. Their labor kept households running, hauling water, spinning wool, grinding grain, tending goats, scrubbing clothes on river stones, until their hands cracked. The girl you followed wakes with aching feet and quietly begins her day. She doesn't complain. Complaining requires time, and time is a luxury. Instead, she braids her hair, ties her worn shawl, and walks the same path her grandmother did, and her grandmother before that. This morning, she's helping collect dung for fuel. It's not glamorous, it's not romantic, but it's essential. Dried dung burns hot and slow, and when the wood runs out, it's what stands between warmth and freezing. Here's your final quirky tidbit. In certain parts of medieval Germany, it was customary to name cows after saints, believing it would make their milk sweeter. Some even whispered to them at dawn, as if prayer could curdle cream into butter faster. The girl places her hand on one old cow's flank, whispers something soft. The cow blinks slowly, like it understands. Later, she'll spin thread from flax. Her fingers already remember the tug, the twist, the rhythm. She's not fast yet, but she's improving. Every thread spun is a thread stitched into the fabric of the household clothing sacks, patches, for a window that never quite closes. Historians still debate whether peasant girls had more agency than we assume, or if we simply romanticize endurance because we don't understand its cost. Were they proud of their work? Did they resent it? Or did they just accept it because the choice never existed? The girl doesn't ask those questions. She just knows that the house needs patching. The goats need tending. And there's a pie to make if the berries haven't frozen. So she works. And tomorrow she'll work again. But tonight she gets one gift. Her family sits together. They share a story. They eat slow, and when the fire crackles, the shadows dance. She leans her head on her mother's arm, and her eyes drift closed. And now as the embers fade in that little cottage, and the voices in the dark grow still, you feel the weight of centuries lifting off your shoulders. The fields, once harsh and endless, are now softened by moonlight. The path through the woods has vanished into fog.
The toil, the hunger, the aching feet, just memories gently dissolving in the quiet. You did it. You lived a day in her life. No fanfare, no epic poem, just the grace of survival and the stubborn beauty of carrying on. Let your breath slow. Feel the texture of homespun linen, the flicker of candlelight, the smell of bread that barely rose. And somewhere off in the distance, a cow softly lowing beneath the stars. Let that image drift. Let it carry you. You are safe. You are warm. You are seen. And in this moment, there's nothing left to do. No baskets to carry. No floors to scrub. Just you and the hush of time unwinding like spun thread in the dark. Let your body sink deeper into the mattress. Let your thoughts loosen like braids at the end of a long day. You're not in the village anymore. You're not in the century anymore. You're just here at the edge of sleep with the soft hum of history holding your hand. Good night.